The morning sun streamed through the windows of West Side Cafe, casting warm patches of light across the polished wooden tables. It was just past 10 on a Saturday, and the popular local spot was buzzing with its usual weekend crowd. The rich aroma of freshly ground coffee beans filled the air, mingling with the scent of baked goods and the cheerful chatter of townspeople enjoying their weekend ritual. Amara Johnson sat at a corner table meant for four, papers spread neatly before her. At 32, she carried herself with quiet confidence, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing a casual but professional blue blazer over a white blouse. She'd arrived early to prepare for her meeting with colleagues, her first big gathering since being appointed as Westlake's new city attorney 2 weeks ago. The position was a significant achievement in her career, and though she hadn't made many public appearances yet, she was eager to dive into her new responsibilities. She sipped her coffee, highlighting sections of the community relations proposal she'd drafted, when a shadow fell across her table. Amara looked up to see a slim woman in her 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair, designer sunglasses perched on her head, and a white linen dress that probably cost more than most people's weekly salary. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice carrying a tone that suggested she wasn't accustomed to being refused. "I need this table," Amara smiled politely. "I'm sorry, but I'm using it. I'm waiting for some colleagues to arrive for a work meeting." The woman's perfectly lined lips tightened into a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Perhaps you don't understand. I'm Eleanor Whitfield, the mayor's wife, and I have some very important friends joining me." She gestured vaguely toward the door. "There are no other four-person tables available, and we need the space." Around them, the buzz of conversation seemed to dim slightly as nearby customers began to notice the interaction. The cafe was indeed crowded, a typical Saturday morning rush, but that didn't change the fact that Amara had arrived early specifically to secure space for her meeting. "I understand, Mrs. Whitfield, but I also need this table for my meeting. I'm sure the staff can help find another solution." Amara kept her voice level and professional. Eleanor's eyebrows shot up as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Do you know who my husband is? James Whitfield runs this entire town." She looked around the cafe as if seeking support from onlookers. "I've never had this kind of treatment here before." A young barista approached cautiously, coffee pot in hand. "Is everything okay here? Can I help with anything?" Before Amara could respond, Eleanor turned to the barista. "Yes, you can help by explaining to this woman that when the mayor's wife needs a table, you accommodate her. It's just good business sense." The barista, whose name tag read Zoe, looked uncomfortable. "Mrs. Whitfield, we're happy to serve you, but all our tables are first come, first served. We can add your name to the wait list for the next available table." Eleanor scoffed. "Wait list? I don't do wait lists." She turned back to Amara, looking her up and down with thinly veiled contempt. "Look, I have a charity board meeting to host, and this table is in the perfect spot. Surely you can just move to the counter or somewhere more appropriate." The implication in her tone wasn't lost on anyone within earshot. A few patrons exchanged glances, and someone at a nearby table began to subtly record the interaction on their phone. "Mrs. Whitfield," Amara said calmly, "I understand you're used to certain privileges, but this is a public establishment. I arrived early specifically to prepare for my meeting, which begins in 15 minutes. I'm not trying to be difficult, but I do need this space." Eleanor's face flushed with anger. "You people always make things so complicated. Do you even know your place in this town? Because I certainly do." She leaned closer, lowering her voice, but not enough to prevent others from hearing. "Maybe in whatever neighborhood you're from this behavior flies, but here in Westlake we show respect to public figures." A tense silence fell over their corner of the cafe. Two elderly women at an adjacent table exchanged shocked glances. A man in a business suit who had been reading the newspaper looked up with a frown. Amara took a deep breath, refusing to let Eleanor's words provoke her. She'd faced this kind of thinly veiled racism before, though rarely so blatantly in public. "Mrs. Whitfield, I'd appreciate if you wouldn't make assumptions about me or where I'm from. I've lived in Westlake for 8 years now, and I have as much right to be here as anyone else." 8 whole years. How impressive, Eleanor said with mock admiration. "I've been the first lady of this town for 12, and my family has been here for generations. Perhaps that means something different to you, but around here it carries weight." By now more people were watching. The cafe manager, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, approached the table. "Ladies, is there a problem I can help with?" Eleanor brightened immediately. "Thomas, thank goodness. Please explain to this woman that I need this table for my charity meeting." Thomas looked uncomfortable, clearly recognizing Eleanor, but also seeing the unfairness of the situation. "Mrs. Whitfield, I'm sorry, but we can't ask customers to give up their tables if they're still using them. It's against our policy." "Policy?" Eleanor's voice rose an octave. "Your policy should be to make the mayor's family comfortable. James and I have supported this cafe for years. We brought the governor here last month." Thomas nodded patiently. "And we appreciate your support, Mrs. Whitfield. We have a 2-person table opening up in about 5 minutes. We could add chairs or perhaps join it with another small table when one becomes available." Eleanor pulled out her phone. "This is ridiculous. I'm calling James. We'll see how you all feel when the health inspector shows up next week." She began dialing, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "James, it's me. You won't believe the treatment I'm getting at Westside Cafe. That table I told you I wanted? Some woman is refusing to move and Thomas is taking her side." Amara exchanged a glance with Thomas, who looked deeply uncomfortable but stood his ground. "Yes, I told them who I am," Eleanor continued into the phone. "Maybe you should remind them about those code violations you mentioned might be overlooked last month." She shot a triumphant look at Thomas. Around the cafe, phones were out now, recording the scene. Eleanor seemed oblivious to this as she dropped her voice to speak to her husband, then hung up with a satisfied smile. "My husband suggests you might want to reconsider your position, Thomas. And as for you," she turned to Amara, "I don't know who you think you are, but in this town certain people matter more than others. That's just reality." Amara closed her folder carefully, keeping her composure. "Mrs. Whitfield, threatening a small business over a table is inappropriate. I understand you're used to getting your way, but that doesn't mean you're above the rules the rest of us follow." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "You have no idea who you're talking to. One word from me and doors in this town will close for you." She reached across the table and pushed Amara's papers aside. "I need this table now." As Eleanor's hand moved across the table, it caught the edge of Amara's laptop, sending it skidding toward the edge. Amara reached out quickly, catching it before it could crash to the floor. "Mrs. Whitfield," Thomas stepped forward. "Please don't touch other customers' belongings." Eleanor ignored him, instead reaching for Amara's coffee cup as if to move it. "This has gone on long enough." "Don't touch my things," Amara said firmly, her patience wearing thin but her voice remaining controlled. "Your position as the mayor's wife doesn't give you the right to put your hands on other people's property." Just then, the cafe door opened and 3 people walked in. A tall black man in his 40s wearing a police uniform with a chief's badge, and 2 professionally dressed individuals who surveyed the scene with confusion. "Amara," called the woman in a charcoal suit. "Is everything okay?" We could hear raised voices from outside. Eleanor froze, her hand still outstretched toward Amara's coffee cup. She glanced at the newcomers, especially taking note of the police chief's uniform, then back at Amara with sudden uncertainty. Amara smiled for the first time since the confrontation began. "Chief Reynolds, Councilwoman Patel, Councilman Diaz, perfect timing. We were just having a discussion about civic responsibility and the rule of law in Westlake." She gestured to Eleanor, whose face had gone from flushed with anger to notably pale. "Have you met Eleanor Whitfield, our mayor's wife? She seems very interested in our meeting today." The cafe had gone completely silent as everyone watched the scene unfold, waiting to see what would happen next. Eleanor's hand withdrew from Amara's coffee cup as if it had suddenly turned scalding hot. The cafe remained oddly quiet, with only the gentle hiss of the espresso machine breaking the silence. Dozens of eyes watched as Police Chief Reynolds, Councilwoman Patel, and Councilman Diaz approached the table. "Mrs. Whitfield," Chief Reynolds said with a polite nod. At 6'2" with broad shoulders and a commanding presence, he had served as Westlake's police chief for 8 years. "Is everything all right here?" Eleanor quickly rearranged her features into a practiced smile. "Chief Reynolds, how lovely to see you. Just a small misunderstanding about seating arrangements." She smoothed her linen dress with manicured hands. "You know how crowded it gets in here on weekends." Councilwoman Patel, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with an impressive record of community advocacy, glanced at Amara's scattered papers and the small crowd of onlookers, many still holding up phones. Doesn't look like a small misunderstanding to me. Amara stood up, straightening her blazer. Chief counselors, thank you for coming. Mrs. Whitfield was just explaining to me how certain people in Westlake are above the rules that govern the rest of us. Her voice remained measured, but there was a firmness to it now. She also seemed very interested in having her husband review this cafe's health code compliance. Thomas, the cafe manager, stepped forward, looking deeply uncomfortable. Mrs. Whitfield wanted this table and was upset that Ms. Johnson wouldn't give it up. Things got a bit heated. Eleanor laughed, though the sound held no warmth. Oh, Thomas is exaggerating. I simply explained that as the mayor's wife, I have certain obligations to the community that require accommodation. She turned to Councilman Diaz, a distinguished man in his 50s who had served on the city council for over a decade. Ramon, you understand how these things work. James and I represent this town. Image is everything. Councilman Diaz raised an eyebrow. What I understand, Eleanor, is that Westlake's laws apply equally to everyone. That's something your husband has always claimed to stand for. A young woman from a nearby table stood up, her phone still recording. She threatened to have the cafe shut down and push this lady's stuff around. Her voice shook slightly, but she continued. She also said some really inappropriate things about knowing your place in town. Several people nodded in agreement. An older gentleman spoke up from his table by the window. I heard it too. Didn't sound right coming from the mayor's wife. Eleanor's smile tightened. Now everyone's blowing this out of proportion. I simply needed a table for my charity board meeting. She looked around expectantly, which should be starting any minute. The Westlake Children's Hospital Fundraising Committee, she added, as if the name alone would vindicate her actions. The cafe door opened again, and 3 well-dressed women entered, looking confused at the scene before them. Eleanor called a woman with copper-colored hair. What's happening? We saw people recording something through the window. Diane. Perfect timing, Eleanor said, relief evident in her voice. Ladies, come meet our police chief and council members. We're having a bit of trouble securing our usual table. The newcomers approached cautiously, clearly sensing the tension. One of them, a tall woman with silver-streaked black hair, looked at Amara with dawning recognition. Wait, aren't you Amara Johnson, the new city attorney? Eleanor's confident smile faltered. The what? Chief Reynolds cleared his throat. Mrs. Whitfield, I don't believe you've been formally introduced to our new city attorney. The city council appointed her 2 weeks ago. Amara extended her hand to the charity board members. Amara Johnson. I'd planned to make more public appearances next week, but it seems word is getting around. Eleanor stared at Amara, the color draining from her face as the implications sank in. The city attorney reported directly to the city council, not the mayor, and had significant oversight of legal matters affecting the town, including enforcement of local ordinances. Councilwoman Patel pulled out a chair. Mind if we join you, Amara? I believe we have a meeting scheduled to discuss the Community Relations Initiative. Of course, Amara replied, gathering her papers to make room. Eleanor remained frozen in place, her earlier confidence evaporating. One of her charity board members touched her arm. Eleanor, perhaps we should find another cafe today. But Eleanor seemed unable to process the suggestion, still fixated on Amara. You're the new city attorney? James never mentioned. The appointment was decided while Mayor Whitfield was at the governor's conference. Councilman Diaz explained, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. The vote was unanimous among present council members. Thomas stepped forward again. Mrs. Whitfield, I've arranged for 2 tables to be pushed together near the back patio for your meeting. It's quiet back there, and the morning sun is lovely. Eleanor's charity friends murmured their thanks, but Eleanor herself seemed rooted to the spot, her mind visibly racing behind her carefully made-up face. You can't be the city attorney, she finally said to Amara. The last one was Gregory Walsh. Amara finished for her. He accepted a position with the State Attorney General's office last month. I was brought in from the county prosecutor's office based on my work with community justice programs. The cafe had begun to return to its normal buzz, though many customers still watched the interaction with interest. Several phones remained out, still recording. Eleanor's friend Diane tugged at her arm. Come on, Eleanor. Let's go sit down. Eleanor shook her head slightly as if clearing it. No, this isn't right. Her voice rose again. You can't just walk in here and pretend you have authority in my town. Do you know how long my family has lived in Westlake? Do you know what we've contributed? Mrs. Whitfield, Chief Reynolds said quietly, I'd suggest taking a moment to cool down. There are a lot of people recording this interaction. Eleanor glanced around, finally noticing the phones pointed in her direction. For a moment, she looked genuinely alarmed. Then her face hardened. Record all you want, she said to the room at large. When James hears about this, things will change. The city attorney serves at the pleasure of the mayor's office. Actually, Councilwoman Patel interjected, that's not accurate. The city attorney is appointed by and reports to the council. It's been that way since the charter revision 3 years ago. A revision your husband championed, if I recall correctly. The whispers around the cafe grew louder. Eleanor's charity board members looked increasingly uncomfortable. This is ridiculous, Eleanor snapped. She fumbled in her designer purse and pulled out her phone again. James will sort this out immediately. As Eleanor stepped away to make her call, Amara turned to her colleagues. I'm sorry about this. Not exactly how I planned to introduce myself to the community. Chief Reynolds shook his head. Don't apologize. From what I could see, you handled yourself with more grace than most would have in the situation. Much more grace, agreed a young mother at the next table, who had been quietly watching the scene unfold while her toddler colored in a book. The things she said to you before your friends arrived? She shook her head disapprovingly. Across the cafe, Eleanor's voice rose as she spoke into her phone. James, you need to come down here right now. That new city attorney you never told me about is causing a scene and humiliating me in front of everyone. She paused, listening. What do you mean you can't? This is important. The charity board members huddled together, clearly discussing whether to stay or go. The silver-haired woman approached Amara's table. Ms. Johnson, I want to apologize. The Children's Hospital Committee doesn't condone this kind of behavior. Eleanor has been under stress lately with the upcoming mayoral campaign, but that's no excuse. Amara nodded appreciatively. Thank you. I understand the pressures of public life can be significant. Eleanor ended her call and stormed back toward the table, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. He can't come. Some meeting with the budget committee. She glared at Councilman Diaz. Which you're supposed to be at, Ramon. The budget meeting is at noon, he replied calmly. We have plenty of time for our community relations discussion first. He turned back to Amara. Speaking of which, I was particularly interested in your proposal about community accountability for public officials. Eleanor's eyes widened at this last comment. For a moment it seemed she might say something else, but instead, she pressed her lips together and turned to her waiting friends. Ladies, let's go. Clearly Westside Cafe no longer values our patronage. She shot a pointed look at Thomas. James will hear about your health code violations. Thomas stepped forward, his patience visibly wearing thin. Mrs. Whitfield, I've offered you alternative seating and tried to accommodate you, but I can't allow you to threaten my business or harass other customers. If you want to report violations, that's your right, but making false claims could be considered defamation. Eleanor stared at him in shock. Thomas had always been deferential to her in the past, and threatening a business over personal grievances could potentially violate several local ordinances. Amara added calmly, including abuse of power statutes that apply to elected officials and their immediate families. The cafe had gone silent again. Eleanor looked from face to face, finding no sympathy from the onlookers. Even her charity friends seemed eager to distance themselves from her behavior. For a brief moment, vulnerability flashed across Eleanor's face. The realization that she had severely miscalculated her position and that her actions were being witnessed, recorded and judged by dozens of community members. But pride quickly overtook it. This isn't over, she said to Amara, her voice low but intense. You have no idea who you're dealing with. With that, she turned and walked toward the door, her charity board members reluctantly following behind her. As she reached the exit, she turned back one last time, addressing the cafe at large. I've supported this place for years. You'll all regret treating me this way. The bell above the door jingled as Eleanor stormed out, leaving a cafe full of stunned customers and a very interesting first meeting for Westlake's new city attorney. The cafe door swung shut behind Eleanor and her uncomfortable entourage, the little bell jingling cheerfully in stark contrast to the tense atmosphere she left behind. For a moment, Westside Cafe remained eerily quiet. Then, like a dam breaking, conversations erupted across the room. Did that really just happen? The mayor's wife threatening a business? Wait till this hits social media. Thomas, the cafe manager, approached Amara's table with a deeply apologetic expression. "Ms. Johnson, I'm so sorry about that. Mrs. Whitfield has always been particular, but never like this." Amara waved away his apology. "You have nothing to apologize for, Thomas. You handled it professionally." She gestured to her colleagues. "Besides, it gave me an unexpectedly public introduction to the community." Chief Reynolds pulled out his chair and sat down, shaking his head. "Not exactly the welcome committee we had planned." His broad shoulders seemed to relax now that the confrontation had ended. "Though I have to say I'm impressed with how you kept your cool." "Definitely impressed," Councilwoman Patel agreed as she settled into her seat. Her dark eyes were sharp with concern, but also worried. Eleanor Whitfield has a lot of influence in this town, and she clearly didn't like being embarrassed. Councilman Diaz nodded gravely, his silver-streaked hair catching the sunlight. "The question is, what will James do when she gets to him? He's always been reasonable, but he's also always backed Eleanor publicly." Amara took a sip of her now lukewarm coffee. "I'm not concerned. I was well within my rights, and frankly, so was Thomas." She turned to the cafe manager. "Though you might want to prepare for that health inspection she threatened." Thomas gave a wry smile. "Already on my mind. I'll have the staff do an extra deep clean today, but honestly, we run a tight ship here. Our last inspection was nearly perfect." A young woman approached their table hesitantly, her phone still in hand. "Excuse me, I'm Kelly from the Westlake Community College paper. I recorded what happened. Would it be okay to write about this for our local news section?" Before Amara could respond, Councilwoman Patel interjected, "I think that's a question for our new city attorney, don't you?" All eyes turned to Amara, who considered the request carefully. "As a private citizen involved in a public incident, I can't stop you from reporting what happened in a public space." She paused thoughtfully. "But as city attorney, I'd ask that you be factual and fair. This incident shouldn't become about personalities or politics." Kelly nodded earnestly. "Of course. We're taught to be objective. It's just, this seems important, especially the part about public officials being held to the same standards as everyone else." "That is important," Amara agreed. "Maybe the most important part." As Kelly thanked them and walked away, Chief Reynolds leaned forward. "You realize this will be all over town by lunchtime, right? With videos. And probably all over Twitter by dinner," Councilman Diaz added, looking at his phone. "Someone's already posted a clip." "It's getting shared." Amara took a deep breath. This wasn't how she'd planned to introduce herself to Westlake, but perhaps it wasn't entirely bad. "Let's focus on our meeting. The Community Relations Initiative is even more relevant now." They spread out their papers, trying to return to business as usual, but the cafe's atmosphere had permanently shifted. Customers kept glancing their way, some offering supportive smiles or thumbs-up gestures to Amara. A few even stopped by to introduce themselves before leaving. "Ms. Johnson, I'm Dr. Huang from Westlake Medical Center," said an older gentleman in wire-rimmed glasses. "Just wanted to say it's refreshing to see someone stand up to that kind of behavior. Eleanor Whitfield has needed a reality check for years." Another woman approached as they were reviewing budget proposals. "Sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to thank you. My daughter is watching how you handled that situation. It's a good lesson that no one is above basic decency, no matter who they're married to." Amara accepted these comments graciously, but tried to keep the meeting on track. They had important work to do, especially now that community relations were clearly a pressing issue in Westlake. Halfway through their meeting, Thomas approached with fresh coffee for everyone. "On the house," he insisted. "And just so you know, Mayor Whitfield just called. He apologized for his wife's behavior and assured me no retaliatory inspections will happen." Councilman Diaz raised an eyebrow. That was fast. The James Whitfield I know usually takes his time before contradicting Eleanor. "Maybe he saw the videos," Chief Reynolds suggested, reaching for his fresh coffee. Thomas lowered his voice. He sounded different, more concerned than I've ever heard him. He asked if we had security footage he could review, in addition to what's already online. The four of them exchanged glances. Mayor Whitfield requesting evidence about his wife's behavior was unexpected. "The plot thickens," Councilwoman Patel murmured. They tried to return to their meeting, but about 20 minutes later, the cafe door opened again and a hush fell over the room. Mayor James Whitfield himself stood in the entrance. scanning the cafe until his eyes landed on their table. James Whitfield was a tall, distinguished man in his late 50s with salt and pepper hair and the practiced smile of a career politician. Today, however, he wasn't smiling. He made his way to their table with purposeful strides, nodding politely to customers who greeted him. "Chief Counselors," he said, then turned to Amara. "Ms. Johnson, I presume? I believe we were supposed to meet officially on Monday." Amara stood and offered her hand. "Mayor Whitfield." "Yes, we had a meeting scheduled." He shook her hand firmly. "I apologize for the change of plans. May I join you for a moment?" Chief Reynolds moved his chair to make room. "Of course, James." The mayor sat down looking uncharacteristically uncomfortable. He was usually the most confident person in any room, a natural politician with an easy manner. Today he looked like a man with a serious problem. "I've just come from viewing some rather disturbing videos," he began, his voice low. "I want to personally apologize for my wife's behavior. It was completely unacceptable." Amara nodded but said nothing, waiting to see where this was going. "Eleanor has been under significant stress lately," he continued. "The upcoming campaign, some health issues in her family. But that's no excuse for what happened here." "No, it's not," Councilwoman Patel agreed, her tone gentle but firm. Mayor Whitfield looked directly at Amara. "I especially want to apologize for the discriminatory undertones in some of her comments. That is not what our administration stands for. As you may know, we've worked hard on inclusion initiatives in Westlake." "I am aware of those initiatives," Amara replied. "They were part of what attracted me to this position." The mayor seemed to relax slightly at this. "Good. I'd hate for this incident to color your perception of our community or my administration." He glanced around the table. "I should also mention that Eleanor will not be pursuing any complaints against this establishment. Any statement suggesting otherwise were heat of the moment." Thomas, who had been hovering nearby, nodded his appreciation. "If I may ask," Councilman Diaz said carefully, "how is Eleanor now?" A flicker of something, anger? Worry, crossed the mayor's face. "She's processing the situation. When she calms down, I expect she'll want to make amends." He didn't sound entirely convinced of this himself. Chief Reynolds cleared his throat. "James, you should know there are multiple witnesses and recordings. This isn't going away quietly." "I'm aware," the mayor replied grimly. "The question is how we handle it moving forward." He turned back to Amara. "Ms. Johnson, as our new city attorney, I'd value your perspective." It was a clever move, Amara thought, asking for her input, making her part of the solution rather than just the victim of his wife's behavior. James Whitfield hadn't become mayor by accident. "Professionally speaking," Amara said carefully, "this incident involves potential violations of the city's anti-discrimination ordinance, possible abuse of power in threatening a business, and public conduct unbecoming of someone associated with the mayor's office." She paused, letting that sink in. "Personally speaking, I believe in second chances and restorative justice. The question is whether Mrs. Whitfield sees the need for either." The mayor's expression was unreadable. "I see, and if she were to make a formal apology?" "That would be a start," Amara replied. "But actions speak louder than words." Mayor Whitfield nodded slowly, seeming to come to a decision. "Would you all be willing to come to my office later today? I think we need a more private setting to discuss next steps." He looked at each of them in turn. "This situation has exposed some issues in our community that need addressing, beyond just one unfortunate incident." Councilwoman Patel raised an eyebrow. "Are you suggesting we turn this into a policy discussion?" "I'm suggesting we use it as a learning opportunity," the mayor replied. "For everyone involved, including Eleanor, and yes, possibly for our policies as well." Chief Reynolds and the council members looked to Amara, silently deferring to her since she was the one directly affected. "I'd be open to that discussion," Amara said finally. "But I want to be clear. This isn't about me personally seeking some kind of retribution. This is about establishing that no one, not even the mayor's wife, is above treating people with basic dignity and respect." Mayor Whitfield held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "Understood. And for what it's worth, I agree." He stood up, straightening his tie. "Shall we say 3 p.m. at City Hall?" "My office," they all agreed, and the mayor prepared to leave. As he turned, he paused and added in a quieter voice, "Ms. Johnson, Eleanor doesn't know I'm here. She also doesn't know that. He hesitated, seeming to choose his words carefully. She's not aware that the anti-discrimination ordinance we passed last year includes enhanced penalties for incidents involving city officials or their families. You might want to review that section before our meeting. With that cryptic suggestion, he nodded farewell and walked out of the cafe, stopping to shake hands and chat briefly with citizens on his way. After he left, the four colleagues sat in silence for a moment. "Well," said Councilman Diaz finally, "that was not what I expected." "He's distancing himself from her behavior," Councilwoman Patel observed. "Politically smart, but is it just politics?" Chief Reynolds wondered aloud. He seemed genuinely troubled. Amara gathered her papers thoughtfully. "I suppose we'll find out at 3 o'clock. In the meantime, I should brush up on that ordinance he mentioned." She couldn't help but smile slightly. Seems our new mayor might be more committed to equality under the law than his wife realized. The meeting wrapped up shortly after, with plans to reconvene at City Hall. As Amara packed up her belongings, she reflected on the morning's unexpected events. Her first official act as Westlake's city attorney would not be drafting contracts or reviewing zoning laws as she'd expected, but addressing a clear case of privilege and prejudice at the highest level of local government. It wasn't what she had planned for her first week on the job, but perhaps it was exactly what the town of Westlake needed. City Hall stood at the center of Westlake, its red brick facade and white columns projecting stability and tradition. By 3 o'clock, when Amara climbed the wide stone steps, the morning's cafe incident had spread through town like wildfire. Several people nodded to her in recognition as she passed through the main entrance, a few even offering quiet words of support. Standing up to Eleanor Whitfield, "About time someone did. Saw the video. Good for you. This town needed someone like you." Amara smiled politely but kept moving. She wasn't interested in becoming the center of some local drama, but she also wouldn't pretend the incident hadn't happened. She had spent the afternoon reviewing the town's anti-discrimination ordinance just as Mayor Whitfield had suggested, and what she found was genuinely impressive. The law had real teeth. In the lobby, she found Chief Reynolds waiting near the security desk, still in uniform but looking more relaxed than he had during the morning's confrontation. "Ready for round 2? He asked with a hint of a smile. "Let's hope it's less dramatic than round 1, Amara replied. They walked together to the elevator, joined moments later by Councilwoman Patel and Councilman Diaz, who arrived discussing budget proposals as if this were any normal day at City Hall. "The mayor's executive assistant called me," Councilman Diaz told them as the elevator doors closed. "Apparently this meeting has been expanded. The town's HR director and communications manager will be joining us." Councilwoman Patel raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like James is treating this very officially." "As he should," Chief Reynolds said. "This isn't just about one incident anymore. Those videos have thousands of views already." The elevator opened directly into a reception area for the mayor's office suite. A poised young woman with cropped hair and a crisp blazer greeted them. "Ms. Johnson, Chief Reynolds' counselors, the mayor is expecting you. Please go right in." The mayor's office was an impressive room with tall windows overlooking the town square. Mayor Whitfield stood as they entered, gesturing toward a conference table where 3 people were already seated. A middle-aged woman with a tablet, a younger man with glasses and a familiar face. Thomas from the cafe. "Thank you all for coming," the mayor said, his voice carrying the practiced warmth of a career politician, though his eyes remained serious. "I believe you know Thomas Chen, the manager at Westside Cafe. And this is Nora Jenkins, our HR director, and Philip Watts, our communications manager." After brief greetings, they all took seats around the table. Mayor Whitfield remained standing, pacing slightly as he gathered his thoughts. "I've asked you here because we need to address what happened this morning comprehensively and correctly." He stopped pacing and faced them directly. "I've reviewed multiple videos of the incident, spoken with Thomas, and consulted with our legal team. There's no ambiguity here. Eleanor's behavior was completely unacceptable." The room was silent. No one had expected the mayor to be quite so direct in criticizing his wife. "Mr. Mayor," Philip, the communications manager, began cautiously, "we should consider how to frame this for the public. Perhaps emphasizing that Mrs. Whitfield was having a difficult day, or no." The mayor's response was firm. "No excuses, no spin. Eleanor said things that were discriminatory. She threatened a local business using my position as leverage. She tried to use her status to bully another citizen. He shook his head. We can't spin that and we shouldn't try. Nora from HR looked surprised but nodded in agreement. That's refreshing to hear, sir. Mayor Whitfield smiled tightly. Don't look so shocked, Nora. I know my reputation as Eleanor's defender. He sat down at the head of the table with a sigh. But this is different. This crosses lines I can't ignore as a husband or as mayor. Amara studied him carefully. There seemed to be genuine regret in his expression, not just political calculation. Mayor Whitfield, if I may ask, what outcome are you hoping for from this meeting? He met her gaze directly. Justice, Ms. Johnson. The same justice anyone else would face in similar circumstances. Which is why I asked you to review our anti-discrimination ordinance. I did, Amara confirmed. It's quite comprehensive. Section 5 specifically addresses abuse of power and discriminatory behavior by public officials or their immediate family members. Exactly, the mayor nodded. An ordinance I championed, by the way, along with the increased penalties for those in positions of public trust. Councilwoman Patel leaned forward. James, are you suggesting we formally charge Eleanor under the ordinance? The room fell silent again. No one had expected this conversation to go in that direction. I'm suggesting, the mayor said slowly, that we follow the law. Ms. Johnson, as city attorney, what would typically happen in a case like this? All eyes turned to Amara. She took a deep breath, aware that her answer would set the tone for what followed. Typically, for a first offense with no physical harm, we would issue a formal citation, require community service hours, and mandate completion of the city's diversity and inclusion training program. There would also be a public apology to the wronged parties. In this case, that would be Thomas and his business as well as me personally. Thomas looked uncomfortable. I don't want to make trouble. You're not making trouble, Chief Reynolds assured him. You were doing your job when someone tried to use their connection to power to intimidate you. The mayor nodded in agreement. Thomas, your business was threatened because my wife didn't get what she wanted. That's textbook abuse of power. There's also the matter of her committee roles, Councilman Diaz pointed out. Eleanor chairs the Cultural Affairs Committee and sits on 3 other town committees, all appointed positions. Positions she would normally have to resign from under these circumstances, Amara confirmed, checking her notes from the ordinance review. Mayor Whitfield closed his eyes briefly as if steeling himself. Then that's what needs to happen. Philip, the communications manager, looked alarmed. Sir, the political fallout will be significant, the mayor finished for him. I'm aware, but the alternative is to send the message that my family is above the law. I can't do that. Nora from HR studied him with newfound respect. For what it's worth, I think this is the right call. Difficult, but right. The question, Councilwoman Patel said carefully, is whether Eleanor will accept these consequences willingly. A flash of something, pain, perhaps a resignation, crossed the mayor's face. She won't, at least not at first, but she doesn't have much choice. The evidence is clear and it's public. There's one more complication, Chief Reynolds added, the racial component of her comments. That elevates the seriousness under the ordinance. Amara had been quietly taking notes, but now she looked up. I'd prefer not to make that the focus if possible. This isn't about me personally or what category of discrimination was involved. It's about the principle that no one should be treated that way, and no one is above accountability. The mayor looked at her with what seemed like genuine appreciation. Well said. And generous given the circumstances. He turned to the communications manager. Philip, I want a statement drafted immediately. No excuses for Eleanor's behavior. A clear outline of the consequences she'll face under our ordinances, and an emphasis that this is about equal application of our laws. Philip nodded, typing rapidly on his tablet. What about the town committees? Councilman Diaz asked. Those positions will need to be filled. Let's address that next week, the mayor suggested. One crisis at a time. Nora raised her hand slightly. There's still the matter of how and when to inform Mrs. Whitfield of these decisions. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. No one envied the mayor that conversation. I'll speak with Eleanor this evening, he said finally. She's currently at her sister's house in Meadowbrook. I think it's better to have this discussion in private first, before any public announcements. Chief Reynolds nodded. That seems fair, and respectful despite everything. I'd like to add one more element, Amara said, thinking carefully. The apology to Thomas and Westside Cafe should include a commitment to patronize the business regularly in the future. Words are important, but actions matter more. Thomas looked surprised. That's not necessary. Actually, it is, Amara insisted gently. Repairing trust requires more than just saying sorry. The mayor nodded slowly. I agree, and I'll make that commitment personally as well. Westside Cafe has always been a town gathering place. It shouldn't suffer because of this incident. They continued discussing details for another hour, the wording of the public statement, the timing of announcements, how to handle press inquiries. Throughout it all, Amara was struck by Mayor Whitfield's demeanor. The political calculation was still there. He was too seasoned a public figure for it not to be. But there seemed to be genuine regret and determination as well. As the meeting wound down, the mayor asked Amara to stay behind briefly while the others left. When they were alone, his carefully maintained composure slipped slightly. Ms. Johnson, I want to apologize to you personally, not just as the mayor but as Eleanor's husband. What she said to you was inexcusable. Amara nodded, appreciating his directness. Thank you. That means a lot. He rubbed his temples tiredly. I've spent years making excuses for Eleanor's difficult moments, blaming stress or misunderstandings. But seeing those videos today, he shook his head. I couldn't pretend anymore. That took courage, Amara acknowledged. Many people would have tried to protect their spouse regardless. Maybe, he said with a sad smile. Or maybe it just took seeing her behavior through someone else's eyes. Through a lot of someone else's eyes thanks to social media. He straightened his tie, visibly pulling himself together. Anyway, I appreciate your professionalism in handling this. It would have been easy to make this personal. It is personal, Amara corrected him gently. For me, for Thomas, for everyone who witnessed it. But that doesn't mean it can't also be handled professionally. The mayor nodded thoughtfully. A good distinction. He extended his hand. I look forward to working with you, Ms. Johnson. Though hopefully under less dramatic circumstances in the future. As Amara left City Hall, the late afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the town square. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Councilwoman Patel. Channel 8 news van just pulled up outside City Hall. Word is getting out. Amara wasn't surprised. In a town like Westlake, news traveled fast. By tomorrow, everyone would know that the mayor's wife was facing consequences for her behavior. Real consequences. Not just empty apologies. She thought about Eleanor Whitfield, sitting at her sister's house in the neighboring town, still unaware that her world was about to change. Part of Amara felt sympathy for her. It couldn't be easy to have your worst moment captured on video and shared with the entire community. But another part of her remembered the look on Eleanor's face in that cafe. The absolute certainty that the rules didn't apply to her. They apply to everyone. Amara murmured to herself as she walked to her car. That's what makes them rules. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Chief Reynolds. Mayor just left for Meadowbrook. Said he'd call us after he talks to Eleanor. Might be a long night ahead. Amara sighed. Yes, it would likely be a long night for many people. The mayor, the communications team preparing statements, the journalists chasing the story. But hopefully, when morning came, Westlake would be one step closer to being a town where everyone played by the same rules, no matter who they were married to. 2 days after the cafe incident, Westlake Community Center buzzed with anticipation. Every seat in the main hall was filled with people standing along the walls and spilling out into the lobby. What had been scheduled as a routine town meeting had transformed into something much more significant. Amara arrived early, surprised by the crowd. She spotted Thomas from Westside Cafe near the front, looking uncomfortable with the attention. Several news crews had set up cameras at the back of the room. Not just the local Channel 8, but reporters from neighboring cities as well. The videos of Eleanor Whitfield's cafe meltdown had spread far beyond Westlake's borders. Quite a turnout, Chief Reynolds commented as he joined her. He'd traded his police uniform for a simple dark suit. Word is Eleanor's coming. Really? Amara hadn't expected that. Based on what she'd heard from Councilwoman Patel, the mayor's conversation with his wife had not gone well. Eleanor had reportedly refused to accept the consequences outlined for her behavior, threatening everything from divorce to a countersuit. Mayor's office confirmed it an hour ago, the chief replied. James convinced her somehow. They found seats near the front as more people filed in. The atmosphere felt charged, like the air before a storm. Conversations hushed as Mayor Whitfield entered through a side door, looking tired but composed in a navy suit. Eleanor followed a few steps behind him, her face a careful mask, designer sunglasses perched on her head despite being indoors. The mayor took his usual place at the center of the town council table. Eleanor sat in the front row, eyes straight ahead, ignoring the whispers that followed her entrance. Councilman Diaz and Councilwoman Patel took their seats at the table, along with the 3 other council members who hadn't been present for the cafe incident, but had certainly heard about it by now. At precisely 7 o'clock, Mayor Whitfield called the meeting to order. After briefly addressing routine town business, he paused, his expression turning serious. Before we continue with our regular agenda, there's an important matter we need to address as a community. His voice carried clearly through the packed room. Many of you have seen videos or heard accounts of an incident that occurred at Westside Cafe 2 days ago, involving my wife Eleanor Whitfield and our new city attorney, Amara Johnson. A murmur ran through the crowd. Eleanor stared straight ahead, her posture rigid. I want to be clear, the mayor continued, that the behavior displayed in that incident does not reflect the values of this town or my administration. It was unacceptable, and there must be accountability. He nodded toward Eleanor, who slowly stood and approached the microphone. Up close, Amara could see the strain in her face despite careful makeup. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone. Good evening, she began, her voice lacking its usual confidence. I'm here to offer a public apology for my behavior at Westside Cafe on Saturday morning. She paused, seeming to struggle with the words. My actions were inappropriate, disrespectful, and yes, discriminatory. The room remained silent, everyone waiting for her to continue. I treated Mr. Chen and his business with disrespect by threatening to use my husband's position against him. I treated Ms. Johnson with prejudice and rudeness. Eleanor glanced down at what appeared to be prepared notes. There is no excuse for my behavior. Not stress, not a bad day, nothing. I was wrong. Amara watched carefully, trying to gauge whether the apology was genuine or just damage control. It was hard to tell. As a consequence of my actions, Eleanor continued, I am resigning from the Cultural Affairs Committee and all other town committees, effective immediately. I will complete 40 hours of community service and attend the town's diversity and inclusion training program. This caused another ripple of whispers. No one had expected such specific consequences to be announced publicly. Additionally, Eleanor added, her voice faltering slightly, I will be making a personal donation to the Westlake Community College Scholarship Fund for minority students, and I commit to patronizing Westside Cafe regularly in the future. She looked up from her notes directly at Thomas. Mr. Chen runs an excellent business that deserves support, not threats. Finally, she turned toward where Amara sat. Ms. Johnson, I especially want to apologize to you. My words and actions were inexcusable. You deserve to be treated with the respect your position and your person command, and I failed to do that. I hope in time I can demonstrate through actions, not just words, that I understand how wrong I was. With that, Eleanor returned to her seat, the room absolutely silent as she walked back. Mayor Whitfield nodded at her, then addressed the crowd again. Thank you, Eleanor. I know that wasn't easy. He straightened his shoulders. As mayor, I want to address what this means for our community moving forward. For the next 15 minutes, Mayor Whitfield spoke about Westlake's commitment to equality, the importance of holding public figures accountable, and specific policy changes the council would be considering to strengthen anti-discrimination measures in the town. He announced a new community dialogue series to address underlying tensions that might exist in Westlake, tensions that had perhaps been papered over by the town's friendly surface, and I'd like to invite our new city attorney, Amara Johnson, to lead this initiative, he concluded, gesturing toward Amara. Her handling of this difficult situation has demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership our town needs. Surprised, Amara made her way to the microphone. She hadn't prepared any remarks, but as she looked out at the diverse faces in the crowd, some skeptical, some hopeful, she knew what needed to be said. Thank you, Mayor Whitfield. I accept this responsibility, though I never expected my first major initiative as city attorney would come about this way. A gentle murmur of laughter rippled through the room, breaking some of the tension. What happened at the cafe was unfortunate, but maybe it was also necessary. Sometimes it takes an uncomfortable moment to reveal what needs changing. She glanced briefly at Eleanor, who was watching her with an unreadable expression. I believe Westlake is a good town filled with good people. But even good people and good communities have blind spots. The question is what we do when those blind spots are exposed. She went on to outline her vision for the community dialogue series. Open forums where residents could speak honestly about their experiences, followed by concrete action plans. As she spoke, she noticed heads nodding throughout the room, including, surprisingly, Eleanor's. When the formal meeting concluded, the community center erupted into dozens of conversations. Some people approached Eleanor, friends offering support, others with more challenging questions. The mayor worked the room like the seasoned politician he was, but Amara noticed his eyes frequently checking on his wife. Thomas from the cafe made his way to Amara, looking relieved. That went better than I expected, he admitted. Do you think her apology was sincere? Amara considered this. I think it's a start. Sincerity is proven over time, through actions. Well, I'll be watching to see if she actually shows up at the cafe, Thomas said with a wry smile. So will everyone else in town, Amara pointed out. That's accountability in action. As the crowd began to disperse, Eleanor approached them. Without her usual entourage, she seemed smaller somehow, less imposing. Mr. Chen, Ms. Johnson. She nodded to each of them. I wanted to speak with you directly, away from the microphones and cameras. Thomas looked wary. Mrs. Whitfield. I understand if you're skeptical about my apology, she said, surprising them with her directness. I would be too in your position, but I meant what I said. She seemed to struggle for words, something Amara suspected was rare for her. The truth is, seeing myself in those videos, I didn't recognize the person I've become. That's not an excuse. It's just a realization. Amara studied her carefully. Recognition is the first step toward change. Eleanor nodded. That's what they say in the materials for the diversity training program. I've already started the readings. She gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. James suggested I get a head start, Thomas spoke up. The true test will be the next time you don't get your way, Mrs. Whitfield. It's easy to be gracious when you're in the spotlight. Instead of taking offense, Eleanor nodded. You're absolutely right, Mr. Chen. And I hope when that moment comes, because it will, I make a better choice than I did in your cafe. She glanced around at the thinning crowd. I should go. James has interviews with the press. As she walked away, Thomas shook his head in wonder. Never thought I'd see the day. Eleanor Whitfield, humbled. People can surprise you, Amara said, watching as Eleanor rejoined her husband across the room. Over the next few weeks, Westlake settled into a new normal. The videos of the cafe incident gradually faded from social media as newer controversies took their place. Eleanor began her community service hours at the town's food bank, working quietly alongside regular volunteers who initially regarded her with suspicion, but eventually accepted her presence. True to her word, she started visiting Westside Cafe, at first with the mayor, later sometimes alone. She would sit quietly at a small table by the window, causing a stir at first, but eventually becoming just another regular customer. The community dialogue series launched with an unexpectedly large turnout. People shared stories of subtle discrimination they'd faced in Westlake, experiences that might have been dismissed before the cafe incident made such conversations impossible to ignore. Mayor Whitfield attended every session, sometimes speaking but mostly listening. 6 weeks after the incident, Amara stopped by Westside Cafe for her usual morning coffee. Thomas greeted her with a smile. Your usual table is open, he said, nodding toward the corner where she'd been sitting that fateful Saturday morning. Thanks. Busy morning? Just the regular crowd, he hesitated. Including Mrs. Whitfield. She's been coming in 3 times a week. Always polite, tips well, makes conversation with other customers. Amara raised an eyebrow. Genuine change? Thomas shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe just good public relations. But either way, she's behaving better, and that matters. As Amara collected her coffee and headed to her table, she passed Eleanor, who was reading a book while sipping tea. Good morning, Ms. Johnson, Eleanor said, closing her book. Amara noticed it was How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. Morning, Mrs. Whitfield. Good book. Challenging, Eleanor admitted. But necessary. She hesitated. I'm speaking at the community dialogue tonight about my experience with the training program. Would it be inappropriate to ask your feedback on my remarks? Amara considered this. Not inappropriate. Actually, it shows good judgment. A hint of Eleanor's old confident smile appeared. 1:30 work for you? I can come to your office. 1:30 works, Amara agreed. As she settled at her table, Amara reflected on the changes of the past 6 weeks. One incident, painful and public, had sparked more meaningful conversation about equality in Westlake than years of polite committee meetings. Eleanor Whitfield, once the most entitled person in town, was now reading anti-racist literature and volunteering at the food bank. The mayor had shown unexpected courage in holding his own wife accountable, and Thomas's cafe had become a symbol of standing up to privilege. Change was happening in Westlake. Not perfect change, and certainly not complete, but real nonetheless. Sometimes, Amara thought as she opened her laptop, it takes seeing ourselves at our worst to begin becoming our best. Outside the cafe window, the town square was coming to life as shops opened and people hurried to work. A new day in a town that was slowly but surely becoming a better version of itself.